Hi, I'm Kian. Just last winter, my parents looked me dead in the eye and called me good for nothing. They threw me out on the coldest night of the year, convinced I was a drain on their resources. What they didn't know was that the very roof over their heads, the comfort they took for granted, was something I'd been quietly funding for years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It was Lunar New Year's Eve in Cebu, the kind where the air hung heavy with the scent of roasted pig and firecrackers, and every home glowed with lanterns and the promise of family. Our house, perched on a hill overlooking the city, shone brightest, of all from the outside, a beacon of warmth and prosperity. It was a grand Spanish-colonial style home, 3 stories of gleaming white paint and dark hardwood, surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens that stretched down to the iron gates. Passersby would often slow down, pointing, whispering about the successful Tan family. But inside, that glow never quite reached me. It was a shell, expertly maintained, but devoid of genuine warmth, especially for me. I walked in, carrying a platter of shone I'd picked up from the best shop in town, still warm and fragrant, the crispy skin promising a delicious evening. In my other hand, a small, meticulously wrapped gift for my mother, a limited edition silk scarf from a designer she admired, a splurge I'd saved for months to buy, foregoing my own small indulgences. My younger brother, Rafa, was already there, lounging on the custom-made sofa. His designer barong was perfectly pressed, shimmering under the soft lighting, and his expensive drone lay conspicuously on the antique console table, a fresh symbol of their favoritism. He barely glanced up from his phone, immersed in a game, his usual dismissive grunt serving as a greeting. "Kian," my mother, Aling Nena, said with a smile that felt painted on, a fragile mask that never quite reached her cold, assessing eyes. "You actually made it." Her tone implied surprise, almost disappointment, that I hadn't found an excuse to be absent. My father, Mang Tonyo, just nodded from his armchair, his gaze already drifting back to the imported television, his expression a familiar blend of indifference and slight annoyance. I followed the familiar sounds of chatter and clinking glasses, into the expansive dining room. The long, gleaming mahogany table was set for a truly opulent feast, a display designed to impress their extended family and friends. Intricate piña cloth, hand-embroidered with delicate patterns, cascaded over the edges. Towering orchid centerpieces, flown in from Holland, perfumed the air. Delicate porcelain plates, each rimmed with gold, were precisely placed, and on each plate, a calligraphy place card. Rafa, Tito Ben, Tita Linda, even my cousin Mia's baby, Leah. My eyes scanned the table. Once, twice, a third time, my heart beginning to thrum with a familiar anxiety. No Kian. My breath hitched. I stood there, the heavy lechon platter, once, a symbol of my effort, now feeling even heavier, like an accusation, in my hands. Maybe it had just fallen under the table. Maybe they'd placed it at a separate side table. My mind scrambled for any reasonable explanation, desperately clinging to the hope of an oversight rather than deliberate exclusion. I placed the platter carefully on the sideboard, near the untouched fruit basket, an offering unnoticed, unappreciated. My cousin, a smug university student named Enzo, caught my eye from across the table. "Oh, Kian," he chirped, his voice dripping, with mock concern, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Still looking for your spot? Don't worry, there's always space on the servant's bench in the kitchen. Isn't that where you're most comfortable?" A few polite snickers rippled through the room, punctuated by my Aunt Linda's slightly more pronounced, almost gleeful chuckle. I offered a tight, polite smile, a practiced reflex that masked the stinging humiliation. For the past 4 years, ever since the financial downturn hit my father's import business, I'd been working 3 jobs, a barista at a popular coffee shop from early mornings, a freelance web developer late into the nights, and assisting at a local NGO on weekends. All of it, silently, ceaselessly, to cover expenses for this very house, this grand lifestyle. But here, in this room, under their judgmental eyes, that dedication and sacrifice meant nothing. It was invisible, just like me. My father, Mang Tonyo, cleared his throat, commanding attention. He raised his crystal glass, the candlelight catching its facets. "To those who truly uplift this family," he boomed, his voice resonating with false pride, "those who bring real prestige and security, who understand the meaning of contribution." He looked around the table, his gaze sweeping over every appreciative face, then pointedly, deliberately, bypassing me entirely. My mother, Aling Nena, followed up, her voice like polished steel, cutting and precise. "Some children build futures, contribute meaningfully to the family's standing. Others," and her eyes flickered to me for the briefest, most searing instant, "just occupy space." A constant drain. The words, delivered with such casual cruelty, hit harder than any physical blow. My stomach clenched, a cold knot of familiar pain tightening in my gut, but I refused to flinch, to show any sign of weakness. I'd mastered the art of holding my breath in this house, of becoming a ghost in my own home, a silent observer in my own life. It was a survival mechanism, learned through years of neglect and dismissal. Still standing, an outsider in my own family's celebration, I slowly backed toward the kitchen doorway, lingering there, out of the way, out of sight. I felt the kind of invisibility that settles deep in your bones, a chilling awareness of being utterly superfluous. I was about to perch on the very edge of a small, unused kitchen chair when Rafa, my brother, walked over, a smirk on his face, a glass of expensive champagne in his hand. "This isn't a shelter, Kian," he drawled, his voice slurred with a sweet, condescending tone. "If you want charity, apply for it. We're celebrating family here, not hosting a soup kitchen." A ripple of laughter bubbled from someone down the dining table, a chorus of distant, uncaring amusement. I didn't even know who it was. It didn't matter. And then, my mother's voice, clear as shattering glass, cut through the air, delivering the final, devastating blow. "You're a burden, Kian. Always have been. Good for nothing." No one gasped. No one corrected her. They kept eating, their forks clinking against the porcelain, their laughter echoing. I stood there, still holding my coat, still in my outdoor shoes, still invisible. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Something in me curled up tight, a bitter knot of resignation and disbelief. I couldn't bring myself to sit down, not because there wasn't a chair, though, in fact, there wasn't an empty one at that overstuffed table, but because even if there had been, it wouldn't have changed the stark truth of that moment. They had made room for everyone except me. They had prepared for everyone, celebrated everyone, but me. So I forced a smile onto my face, or at least tried to, a shaky, brittle attempt. "I'll go put my things upstairs," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper in the echoing silence of their indifference. No one answered. No one looked up. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all, just a gust of wind passing through the room. I walked the creaky hallway, each step a dull thud against the polished wood, heading up to the room I used to call mine. The door, once adorned with a faded sticker of a cartoon cat, now had a small, elegant brass plaque that simply read, "Guest Quarters." My stomach twisted. Inside, it looked like a page torn from a luxury catalog, neat, impersonal, and strikingly cold. The twin bed was made up in crisp white and cool blue linens, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos of my childhood drawings that once plastered the walls. A stack of freshly laundered towels sat folded with military precision on the pristine dresser. There was no sign of me anywhere. No faded photograph of my high school graduation, no childhood trinket I'd forgotten, not even a spare toothbrush in the gleaming, untouched bathroom. It was as if my entire existence had been meticulously scrubbed away, leaving behind a sterile, unwelcoming space. I sat on the very edge of the bed, still clutching my coat, its familiar weight a small comfort against the sterile formality of the room. My fingers were trembling, but not from the cold. A deeper chill had settled into my bones. My gaze drifted to the wall hook beside the door, the very spot where I used to hang my school bag. Rafa's expensive designer jacket, the one he'd boasted about costing more than my monthly rent, hung there, draped perfectly, occupying the space as conspicuously as he occupied my parents' attention. There was no space for mine, no empty hook for my humble coat. I glanced down at the gift still, clutched in my hand, the beautifully wrapped silk scarf for my mother, her favorite color, a deep emerald green, or at least it used to be her favorite. I didn't unwrap it. There was no tree to put it under in this impersonal room. I just sat there, coat in lap, scarf in hand, staring at nothing, at everything, at the painful void where I used to belong. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had erased me, deliberately, on purpose. It wasn't an oversight. It was a calculated act of dismissal. I stayed frozen on the edge of that guest bed for a long while. The room smelled faintly of lavender air freshener and lemon cleaner. Too clean, too untouched, too perfect in its emptiness. The coat hook, adorned only by Rafa's flamboyant jacket, still stared at me, like it had something to say, a silent witness to my systematic removal. My hands finally moved, slowly, deliberately. I stood, gathered my coat, and picked up the untouched gift. I then tiptoed downstairs, each creak of the old stairs sounding like a betrayal in the quiet house. The dining room was still glowing, distant laughter echoing softly, a muffled symphony of a family I was no longer a part of. I didn't belong to that warmth, not anymore. Perhaps in their eyes, I never truly had. The front door creaked mournfully. As I eased it shut behind me, the sound a final, definitive period at the end of a very long, painful sentence. The cool night air of Cebu hit me hard, like a physical blow, as if it had been waiting to embrace me in its indifferent chill. The streetlights cast long, skeletal shadows across the empty sidewalk. The shone platter I'd brought, my carefully chosen gift, my presence, all of it had been dismissed, pushed aside. Just like my contributions. I didn't bother brushing the dust off my compact car's windshield. It wasn't warm, but at least it was mine. It was the one thing in my life that truly belonged to me, that I had earned and maintained independently. I drove aimlessly for a few blocks, past other glowing houses, quiet streets, shadows of other people's joyous Lunar New Year's celebrations. Each family seemed to be bathed in the golden light of belonging, a stark contrast to the darkness that had enveloped me. I ended up at a small, dimly lit convenience store near the highway, the kind with blinking fluorescent lights that hummed overhead, and sad, dusty packets of instant noodles for sale by the counter. My stomach growled, a hollow ache that echoed the emptiness inside me, but I wasn't hungry. Still, I went inside and poured myself a small cup of instant coffee from the machine. I needed something to hold, something warm to ground me in the sudden, jarring reality of my expulsion. At the gas pump outside, I slid in my debit card, declined. My heart skipped a beat. I tried again, declined, a third time. Still nothing. The cheap paper cup of coffee shook in my hand as I walked back to the car and frantically opened my banking app on my phone. The screen lit up with numbers that swam before my eyes. The Emergency Family Fund account, a joint account I'd diligently set up years ago for everything from unexpected medical bills for my father to urgent house repairs after the last typhoon, and yes, even holiday expenses like the shone I'd just carried in, was empty, drained. PHP 345,000 dollars gone. My name was still listed on the account as the primary holder, but someone had made a massive withdrawal just a few hours earlier, on the day I was to be declared a burden. My name was still there, a silent witness, but everything else, all the resources I had painstakingly built, was gone. I stared at the numbers on the screen, my heart pounding, a cold dread washing over me. This was more than just being left, out of a dinner. This was a violation. Then, my phone vibrated. An incoming text. It was from Tita Remy. We weren't particularly close. She was the kind of relative who sent generic holiday greetings and gossiped subtly through her social media posts. But still, her message made me sit bolt upright, the instant coffee sloshing in my trembling hand. Didn't know you weren't in. The family Viber chat, Kian? But maybe it's for the best, no? So much drama. Family Viber chat? I scrolled through my messages, my fingers flying across the screen. Nothing. I clicked over to Instagram just to check. My brother Rafa had posted a photo just a few hours ago. Candlelight, crystal champagne flutes, a perfectly arranged table, and someone holding a platter of shone. My shone. Buried deep in the comments, someone had tagged a group story, a screenshot of a Viber group chat labeled, "The Real Tans." My parents, Rafa, his girlfriend, my cousins Enzo and Mia, even Tita Remy. Not me. I wasn't just out of the loop. I was intentionally left out. A soft buzz built behind my ears, like static or the sound of silence made impossibly loud. I leaned back in the driver's seat, letting my head rest against the cold window of my car. The cheap coffee mug felt like a feather in my hand, useless against the sudden, overwhelming weight of this new betrayal. It wasn't just the money. It was the deliberate, calculated exclusion. A year and a half ago, I'd picked up an overnight shift at a bustling call center, enduring endless hours of customer complaints and mind-numbing data entry. Not because I needed extra cash for myself, my own needs were always secondary, but because my father's business had hit a rough patch, a particularly nasty tax audit he was too proud to tell anyone about. I'd found the official-looking paperwork on the kitchen table during one of my rare visits, tucked under a pile of old newspapers. I never said a word to him. Instead, I quietly found a way to help, pouring my extra earnings into the business account they never checked. 3 weeks later, Rafa showed up with a brand new top-of-the-line motorcycle. From Dad, he'd boasted, revving the engine in the driveway. Can you believe it? He said it was a reward for all my support of the family. I could believe it. I just didn't want to. I remembered sitting across from my father at breakfast a few days after that, pouring his coffee while he meticulously read the newspaper, acting as if he hadn't spent a single peso, as if he hadn't just used my money to fund Rafa's extravagant purchase. I never asked him directly. I didn't want the answer, didn't want to confirm the gnawing suspicion that they saw me as merely a resource, a walking ATM. But I had it now. They used my help, then cut me out. My fingers clenched the steering wheel, the plastic digging into my palms. The air in the car felt thick, suffocating. Eventually, I drove to a budget motel on the edge of town. It was called Rest Easy Inn, an ironic name for the turmoil churning within me. The carpet in the hallway smelled like stale cigarette smoke and cheap disinfectant. The heat unit in the room rattled more than it warmed, sounding like a dying cough. I dropped my worn duffel bag onto the queen-sized bed, its springs protesting loudly, and walked to the small, cramped bathroom. The mirror was cracked in the corner, a jagged line bisecting my reflection. My hair was windswept and tangled from the rushed departure. My cheeks were blotchy from the cold night air and the sudden rush of anger. My eyes, though, were tired but not broken. Not anymore. I could still hear my mother's voice from earlier, replaying in my mind like a broken record. You're a burden. Kian. Always have been. Good for nothing. I stared at my reflection, at the lines of fatigue around my eyes, at the faint tremor in my hands. Then, for the first time that night, I spoke out loud, my voice hoarse but clear in the quiet room. Then let's see how they live without the good-for-nothing burden. A grim, determined resolve settled over me. I dried my hands on a thin, scratchy towel, the rough fabric a stark reminder of my new, humble surroundings. Then I sat down at the edge of the bed, the mattress sighing under my weight, and pulled out my worn laptop from my duffel bag. Its familiar hum was a small comfort in the suffocating quiet of the motel room. My fingers, steady now, moved with a quiet, almost chilling precision over the keyboard. One tab, the family fund. The empty balance still stared back at me, a testament to their greed and my naivete. Another tab, the utilities I'd been covering at the house since my father's back surgery a few years prior, which had severely limited his ability to manage finances. I'd seen the mounting overdue notices, hidden under the sofa cushions during a visit, and had quietly taken over. Another tab, the monthly auto payments I'd set up for my mother's expensive maintenance medications, which she needed daily but often forgot to refill on time. One by one, with each click, I ended them. I didn't rage, I didn't scream. There was no theatrical outpouring of anger, just a cold, methodical determination. I simply clicked, click, click, click. The sound was almost surgical, each digital severing a cut from the invisible chains that had bound me. And then, I leaned back against the headboard, feeling a strange lightness settle over me. For so long, I'd always thought that helping them, silently bearing their burdens, meant I was strong. That staying silent, enduring their slights, meant I was mature, the bigger person. But maybe, just maybe, letting people step on you isn't noble. Maybe it's just a deeply ingrained habit, a bad one. Well, mine just broke. I opened my laptop again, and for the first time in years, I stopped paying their bills. The motel room hummed with a silence too dense for sleep. The single yellow lamp on the nightstand flickered, casting soft, dancing shadows across the peeling, floral wallpaper, which seemed to mock my attempts at peace. I sat cross-legged on the bed, the laptop warm against my thighs, a steaming cup of gas station coffee by my side, its surprising bitterness perfectly matching my own newfound resolve. Click. The electricity for their sprawling house, the one that used to hum with countless lights and air conditioning units, was gone. Click. The gas for their gourmet kitchen and hot showers was terminated. Click. The water for their elaborate gardens and multiple bathrooms was off. Click. Their high-speed internet, their connection to the world and their precious online family chat was disconnected. Each account listed me as the primary. Every single monthly autopay had been my doing, quiet, consistent, and utterly unseen. I'd been the invisible backbone of that house, that family, that perfectly curated illusion of stability they paraded around during holidays and social gatherings. I wasn't born for revenge, but I certainly wasn't born to be used, to be bled, dry by the very people who claimed to love me, while simultaneously dismissing me as good for nothing. I leaned back further, my spine pressed against the cold wooden headboard, watching the cursor blink on the blank screen like a slow, deliberate metronome in the newfound quiet. One more tab. The family joint savings account. My name was still there. The balance was frozen. No withdrawals allowed, no deposits either. Just a silent, impenetrable wall between them and what used to be their immediate financial lifeline. Then, almost on instinct, a chilling premonition guiding my fingers, I opened another window and checked my own personal credit report. Just a quick scan, a routine check, and there it was, stark and undeniable. A recent inquiry, an application for a personal loan under my name, filed just 3 weeks ago. The applicant contact listed? My brother, Rafa's email address. I stared at it like it was a typo, a glitch in the system. But deep down, I knew better. He hadn't even bothered trying to hide it. So confident were they in their unchallenged exploitation of me. They weren't just draining what I had. They were planning to build their future, their lavish lifestyle, on my name, my credit. The same brother who just last year had scoffed, "You're not management material, Kian. You're a helper, not a doer." I laughed then, a dry, hollow sound that never left my chest. It was nearly 2:30 a.m. when my phone lit up again. Tita Remy. That name always made my shoulders tense. She wasn't overtly cruel like some of the others, just carelessly gossipy, the kind of woman who spread rumors through prayer requests and offered compliments with a barely disguised barb in her voice. Her message was short, direct, and devastating. "Your mother told the church elders you've been living off them for years. Said they gave you everything? People donated gift cards to help with your recovery." Recovery? Like I'd been ill, or unstable, or broken? I stared at the words, jaw slack, a cold wave washing over me. Then I reread it, slower, the meaning, sinking in with a sickening finality. They raised money off my name. My throat tightened and I blinked, but the motel room remained unchanged. The same flickering lamp, the same crooked, faded print of a serene rice field on the wall. But now, the air felt heavy, dense with a new, profound layer of betrayal. My mother, Aling Nana, who barely managed a stiff embrace at my high school graduation, who had dismissed my demanding NGO job as cute and a hobby, had painted me as a dependent, a charity case, someone in need of recovery. And people believed her. They donated. They prayed. They judged. I could picture it perfectly. Sunday service at the Immaculate Conception Parish. Her in a perfectly tailored crimson turno, her voice soft but soaked in performative sorrow. "She's struggling, but we're doing all we can," she would lament, dabbing a handkerchief daintily at her dry eyes. All this while I was working double shifts, while I was quietly paying her phone bill, while I was ensuring the property taxes on their house were always paid on time. My hands shook, not from rage, but from something older, deeper. That same icy ache I used to feel lying under two thin blankets in my unheated childhood bedroom during the cold season, the room she'd always called Kian's corner. I opened my car's glove compartment, fumbling past old receipts and a faded map of Cebu City, until my fingers found my old notebook. It was the same one I used to track patient intake when the clinic's digital system crashed, a relic from a time when my help felt tangible and appreciated. I pulled it from my bag now, its familiar weight a small comfort, and flipped past grocery lists and scribbled to-dos for the NGO. Then, my pen began to move, its tip scratching softly against the paper. January 15th. Mang Tonyo's tax lien payment. PHP 125,000 ZIR. March 2nd. Water pump repair for the main house. PHP 15,500 baht ZIR. May 12th. Rafa's graduation party catering. They said they'd pay me back, but never did. PHP 4,800 baht. July 4th. Emergency roofing repair after the sudden squall. PHP 22,000 tau. August. School supplies for my nieces and nephews, Rafa's kids, PHP 3,200 tau. September. Electricity bills, x 3 months, PHP 18,750 dollars I wrote until my wrist ached, chronicling every peso, every favor, every sacrifice I was told to simply just do, because you're good at that kind of thing, Kian. I wasn't doing this to send to them, not yet. I was doing this to remember, because now I understood. They didn't forget what I did. They buried it. They actively suppressed the memory of my contributions because admitting it meant seeing me. Admitting it meant acknowledging that I had held them up, not as the failed daughter, not as the good-for-nothing burden, but as the quiet, indispensable backbone of their comfortable existence. I paused, closed the notebook gently, and stood, The heater in the motel room clicked off, plunging the space into a deeper silence. But this time, it didn't feel so lonely. It felt like clarity, a cool, sharp edge of understanding. By sunrise, they'd feel the absence of the daughter they pretended never mattered. The silence in their grand house would be deafening. By 7:02 a.m., I was sitting in a stranger's kitchen. Only she wasn't really a stranger. Elena was a senior nurse from the NGO clinic, one of those rare people who don't pry or posture, just kind, steady, solid. The type who noticed when you skipped lunch 3 days in a row and quietly slid a sandwich onto your desk without saying a word, then simply walked away. Her apartment in a quieter part of Cebu was small, but it was warm, lived in, filled with the comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee and old books. I'd barely had time to unpack my duffel bag, mostly just a change of clothes and my laptop, when she placed a chipped mug in front of me. Steam rose from the dark liquid, a comforting tendril reaching towards my face, like it understood I couldn't form words yet. I didn't say thank you out loud. She didn't need me to. I took the mug, its warmth seeping into my cold hands, and stared out the window. The city outside was waking up, a soft, undisturbed blanket of morning mist still clinging to the distant mountains, like the world was pretending everything was clean and new. My phone vibrated once, then again and again. Within minutes, it was a steady buzz, a relentless barrage of incoming messages, texts, Facebook pings, Instagram tags. I hesitated, my stomach churning. The caffeine hadn't even kicked in, and already the outside world was intruding. When I finally checked the screen, my gut twisted. Screenshots. Dozens of them. A post from Antonio, my father, public, complete with a Lunar New Year family photo. It was cropped just enough to meticulously exclude me. The caption read, "We gave our all to our ungrateful daughter, Kian, and she walked away, abandoning us on this sacred holiday. Please keep our family in your prayers this new year." I put the phone down, not with a bang, but with a quiet thud. I didn't throw it, but the temptation was undeniably real. Elena looked up from the stove, where she was gently stirring something in a pan, and asked softly, "Do you want me to make some pandesal?" I shook my head, my voice rough. Let them speak. Let them twist the story. Because now, I breathed, feeling a strange, quiet strength bloom in my chest. Now I had nothing left to lose. That didn't mean it didn't sting, a sharp, familiar ache. Elena brought over a plate of freshly toasted pandesal anyway, buttered and steaming. She placed it beside me and sat across the table, her presence a silent anchor. Her kind eyes scanned, my face, not judging, not pitying, just watching, truly seeing me. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be looked at without an agenda, without a hidden motive. She hesitated, then spoke, her voice gentle. A friend of mine from church mentioned something strange last night. I looked up, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. They had a prayer circle. Your mother, Aling Nana. She said you'd stolen from the family fund and that you've been unstable, that you needed serious help and spiritual guidance. The warm pandesal suddenly tasted like cardboard in my mouth. My jaw tensed, a muscle jumping, in my cheek. So now I'm not just a burden. I'm unstable. And a thief. Elena didn't answer. She didn't have to. I sat in silence, staring at the faded blue paint on her kitchen wall, cracked in one corner near the ancient air conditioning unit. The trembling in my hands returned, small but sharp. I held the mug tighter, as if trying to ground myself. They weren't just deleting me from their photos and conversations. They were replacing me with a damning narrative. And it was working, or so they thought. By late morning, the tide slowly started to turn. First, a comment from Professor Reyes, my 10th grade literature teacher, appeared under Mang Tonyo's public Facebook post. "That's quite odd," she wrote. I distinctly recall Kian working 3 jobs to put herself through university while simultaneously supporting her family. Doesn't sound like an ungrateful burden to me. Then another, from an old family friend. Isn't she the one who quietly covered their house's major repairs after the last typhoon a few years back? And what about the time she took over the mortgage? Payments when Tanyo's business struggled? One by one, old classmates, distant cousins, even a nurse from my old clinic rotation began to push back against the narrative. She paid for their utilities during the lockdown, I remember. She even canceled a much-needed solo trip to do it. Another commented, "Y'all told the church she was jobless, but she's been running the outreach programs at the NGO for years, practically single-handedly." I didn't reply to a single comment. Didn't like, or heart, or share. I simply let them talk. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the girl standing alone at the edge of the dining table, ignored and invisible. I felt seen, not just through my own eyes, but through the eyes of others. It was a powerful, validating sensation. Then came the email from the Immaculate Conception Parish's assistant treasurer. The subject line read, "Private inquiry. Disbursements related to Aling Nenatan." I nearly deleted it out of habit, associating it with more family drama. But something made me click it open. It read, "Dear Kian, I hope this note finds you well. I write in confidence due to a serious concern. We noticed that Ms. Aling Nenatan had requested and received over PHP 75,000 dollars in emergency donations this past fall, marked for urgent medical treatment for her recovering daughter. We now understand this may not be accurate. Please let us know if you are in need of support. We are here for you." I reread the line twice, 3 times. Medical treatment for her recovering daughter. I hadn't even had a common cold this year, let alone a debilitating illness requiring church donations. I typed my reply slowly, carefully. "Thank you for reaching out, but I'm not the one in need anymore." And I meant it. They had taught people to pity me. They'd crafted that role carefully, whisper by whisper, playing the victim in public while bleeding me dry in private. But now, people were starting to pity them, and that was a kind of justice I hadn't known I needed until it arrived. The coffee cup was still warm when I set it on the edge of the couch in Elena's living room and laid my phone on top of my chest. My fingers felt stiff from the endless scrolling, like even my body didn't want me to look at anything else. But the damage, both to me and to their carefully constructed facade, had already landed. Late afternoon sunlight peeked through the slats of Elena's blinds, casting a soft, forgiving hue over the peeling paint on the walls and the cluttered coffee table. Her cat, Pusang, purred quietly from the corner, kneading an old throw blanket with patient, rhythmic paws. The room was peaceful, a quiet haven. But I wasn't. I had tried to sleep, but the ache in my ribs wasn't physical. It was shame. That familiar old kind, the kind that whispers, "You must have done something to deserve it. You allowed this." I picked my phone back up. The first image that met me was a freshly uploaded post on my mother's Facebook. A Lunar New Year holiday photo. Mang Tonyo and Aling Nena seated together on the ornate antique chair by the fireplace. Rafa behind them, with his perfect hair and pristine barong. The colorful lanterns were hung, candles glowing, every face smiling as if nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. Except mine wasn't there. I remembered the moment clearly. I had been standing just to the right of the mantel, the shone platter, still heavy in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest because I'd realized too late there was no seat for me at the table, no spot in the frame. The photographer had asked everyone to squeeze in. I hadn't even stepped forward. Now I knew why. They'd wanted the version without me. My face hadn't just been forgotten. It had been cropped carefully, deliberately, like a marketing team scrubbing, an image clean for a new campaign. I sat upright, the cushions of the pull-out couch folding beneath me. They didn't delete me by mistake. They curated my absence. For a few minutes, I didn't move. I stared at the photo like it was a crime scene, mentally circling the edges where I'd once existed. Then, stupid as it sounds, I opened my notes app and started writing a message to my mother. It wasn't angry. It wasn't anything like what I should have said. It started with, "Hi, Mom. I'm sorry if I made you feel like I disrespected the family. I never meant to." I told myself maybe the silence had been a misunderstanding. Maybe people say hurtful things in the heat of the moment. Maybe we'd all just gotten tired. Maybe I was just tired of being angry. My thumb hovered over the send icon. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't send it. Instead, I decided to clean up some old files on my phone, get rid of the voicemails, the endless screenshots, the storage-heavy videos I'd never watched. My cousin Mia had sent me something on Lunar New Year's Eve that I hadn't opened yet. The file just read, "Dinner clip." I tapped it out of curiosity, a morbid fascination taking hold. The video began shakily. Mia's phone had been propped up in a napkin holder or something, at the far end of the dining table. The camera faced my parents, just behind a plate of untouched spring rolls and a wilting salad bowl. My mother's voice came first, sharp and unmistakable. She might be 34, but she still acts like she's 14. All that therapy, and what did it teach her? To mope and play the victim. Laughter, my father chimed in, raising a glass. "Let's just hope she leaves before dessert. I'm not cleaning up after one of her moods again." More laughter, from Rafa, from his girlfriend, from an uncle who hadn't spoken to me directly in years. None of it sounded rushed. None of it was said in anger or heat. It was ease, casual cruelty, words sharpened by routine. The same words they must have used countless times when I wasn't in the room. Maybe when I was a child. Maybe when I was standing just around the corner, out of sight. I didn't cry. That would have been too easy. I closed the video, sat still, for a long, quiet while, then walked quietly to Elena's bathroom mirror. My reflection looked almost unfamiliar. Worn, yes, but not broken. The faint lines around my eyes reminded me of my grandmother, her quiet strength, her enduring silence. I reached for the draft message on my phone, stared at it for a beat, then hit delete. If they wanted to pretend I was never there, fine. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them to rewrite history. I stared into my reflection, my voice cracking, just once. They wanted me gone, fine, but they won't erase me without a fight. Because now I had evidence, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to be seen. The parking lot behind the Cebu City Courthouse was slick with gray slush and the residue of heavy rain, and the wind bit through my thin jacket as I stepped out of my car. I clutched the key to my P.O. box in one hand and tightened my scarf with the other, shivering. The sky was the color of dishwater, typical for a moody February morning in the city. The mailroom smelled faintly of old paper and floor cleaner. I opened Box 101 and pulled out the usual junk mail, a flyer for a payday loan place I'd never use, a local political newsletter. Then I saw it. A cream-colored envelope from the Philippine National Bank, stamped urgent. I didn't open it right. There, amidst the fluorescent hum and the scattered discarded envelopes. I waited until I was safely seated back inside my car, heater humming faintly, the windshield slowly clearing. Inside was a fraud alert. A loan application had been submitted, under my name just 3 days ago. Someone had tried to secure a PHP 1.5 million personal loan and listed their place of employment as Tan Family Enterprises, my father's business. I hadn't lived at that address since Lunar New Year's Eve, hadn't been actively involved in their business for years. My name, my credit, was still being used like a family tool, just another shared utility, like the old, heavy fan in my childhood room I was never allowed to touch, because it was theirs. Just another thing they assumed belonged to them. I sat still, letting the words sink in. the cold dread turning into a quiet, simmering anger. I wasn't even shocked anymore. That was the sickest part. I was tired, yes, a weariness that seeped into my bones. But I wasn't surprised. They weren't done feeding off me. Instead of crying, instead of despair, I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the notebook I kept there for court intake notes from my NGO work. I turned to a blank page, wrote down the date, the bank's contact, the type of alert. Then I drove straight to the community nonprofit downtown, where I sometimes helped with translation for low-income clients. Greta, a sharp legal assistant who worked there part-time, looked up when I walked in, her brow furrowing slightly. Okay, Kian. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm about to file something official, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. I just need a little help making sure it's airtight. Greta nodded, her expression serious. Let's get started. We spent the next hour drafting a fraud complaint. It was documented, not emotional. Calm, but complete. I had the dates, the screenshots, the paper trail. This time, I wasn't spiraling. I was building a case. Later that afternoon, after stopping to pick up some fresh bread and local coffee beans for Elena as a thank you, I got a call from my landlord. I didn't recognize the number at first. "Hello, Kian," he said, polite but formal, his voice carrying a hint of concern. "We've received a complaint through the building management. Apparently there was some sort of disruption or argument on your balcony last night. A neighbor reported excessive noise." My heart sank. I hadn't been on the balcony. I'd been inside with Elena, watching a documentary and quietly playing a word game on my phone. "There's been a mistake," I said, my voice tight. "Well," he hesitated. "The form had your name signed on the bottom and your unit number listed. Just wanted to give you a heads up. We'll have to investigate." After we hung up, I asked Elena if anything strange had happened while I was out briefly for groceries. She looked up from the kitchen table, a puzzled expression on her face. "Oh, that woman in the expensive Barot saya came by. Didn't ring the bell, just stood out front talking to a man in a red polo shirt. She pointed at your window once, then left." My throat went dry. Was she very put together? Almost too perfect? "Yeah," Elena mused. "Kind of the type who wears full makeup to a yoga class. Rafa's girlfriend, Sophia, of course. She was always trying to impress Aling Nena. They weren't just dragging my name through their social circles anymore. They were reaching into my life, trying to stain my record where I lived, where I rested. They wanted to ruin my name, not just my seat at their table. That night, after Elena went to bed and the TV had long gone quiet, I opened my laptop again. But this time, I didn't go into bank accounts. I didn't pull up my credit report. I opened a blank document and titled it, "The True Cost of Being the I, Family's Silent Mortgage Payer." Line by line, I began writing. Not for a lawyer, not for the building management, not even for the bank. This was for me. For the girl who used to split her meager lunch with Rafa at school because he forgot his allowance. For the daughter who covered the overdue property tax bill while her parents casually remarked she owed them that much for letting her stay in the guest room. For the woman who was still being used, even after she'd left, even after she'd been kicked out. I didn't hit post, but the document sat there waiting. My cursor blinked. So did I. It wasn't rage anymore. It was readiness. The morning started with light pouring through the sheer curtains in Elena's living room. It was a still kind of quiet, a profound peacefulness I hadn't experienced in years. No banging doors, no sharp voices coming from down the hall, no subtle accusations hanging in the air, just the gentle warmth of the sunrise, the faint comforting purr of the air conditioning unit, and the rich smell of fresh coffee already brewed. I stretched slowly, my bones stiff from a night spent on the pull-out couch, But my hands didn't tremble this time when I reached for the chipped mug Elena had left beside my laptop. She didn't say anything as she left for her early shift at the clinic, just gave me a small nod, a silent acknowledgement, like she knew I had important work to do. I opened the laptop. The draft sat on the desktop like a dare, its title stark and challenging, The True Cost of Being the Family's Silent Mortgage Payer. I reread every word, each sentence a testament to years of quiet sacrifice. I double-checked the screenshots, the bank statements showing substantial mortgage payments in my name, direct transfers to their utility providers for a house I hadn't truly lived in for months, receipts for major repairs, the weekly grocery deliveries, the credit card payments I'd covered for them. It was all there. My silent ledger of what love, or at least the expectation of it, had cost me. Above the images, above the raw, unvarnished facts, I typed one single defiant line. This is what good for nothing looks like. And then, with a deep breath that felt like the first truly free one in years, I clicked post. Then I closed the laptop, a strange lightness filling me. I didn't pace. I didn't hover over the screen like a teenager counting likes or comments. I let it go out into the world, releasing it with the same quiet purpose I used to let my paycheck go into their mortgage account, without expectation, just with clear intent. By midday, my phone buzzed more than it had in weeks, a continuous, insistent tremor against the wooden coffee table. The first message was from an old high school classmate I hadn't spoken to since graduation. She sent a screenshot of my post. Her message read simply, "This needed to be said, Kian. So proud of you." Then came another, and another. Former neighbors, old church friends, even a retired teacher, Ma'am Luna, who once patiently helped me write my college application essay late into the night. She commented publicly under my post, "I remember Kian working nights at the diner, then coming to school exhausted, but still helping the parish youth council, tirelessly fundraising for her parents' church. This family has a very short memory." Someone else replied beneath her, "Didn't she basically shovel her parents' driveway every winter while they stood watching from the porch, complaining about the cold?" The comments multiplied. Screenshots spread like wildfire across local social media groups. People who hadn't spoken up before, who had perhaps quietly suspected, finally did. And then a text from Sophia, Rafa's girlfriend, came in like a venom-tipped thorn. "Hope you're happy embarrassing the family, Kian. Aling Nena's crying. Mang Tonyo says you've ruined Lunar New Year for everyone who ever loved you. You're despicable." I stared at the words, but instead of replying, I set my phone face down on the table, letting it vibrate silently. Let her stew in silence, just like they'd made me do for years. Around 5 p.m., the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Elena was still at work, and I hadn't told anyone else where I was staying. I cracked the door open cautiously and blinked in surprise. Father Ricardo, our parish priest since I was a child, stood on the landing, both hands wrapped around a large, steaming casserole dish. He wore a long, simple cassock and had a look I hadn't seen on him since I was 10 years old and broke a valuable statue in the church during a misguided game of hide-and-seek. "May I come in, Kian?" he asked, his voice soft, unaccusing. I hesitated, then stepped aside, my heart doing a strange flip. He didn't say anything about the post, didn't ask for clarification or defense. He just held out the dish. It smelled wonderfully of caldereta, my favorite, a rich, savory stew. "This isn't charity, Kian," he said softly, his eyes meeting mine with genuine warmth. "It's acknowledgement, and a bit of comfort for a daughter who has given so much." I nodded slowly, unsure how to respond, a lump forming in my throat. And then he turned and left, his footsteps quiet down the hall. No sermon, no advice, no, "I'll pray for your healing." Just an act of profound recognition. When I closed the door, I stood there for a long moment, the warm casserole dish in my hands, staring at the ground like it could explain something vast and complicated that had just been simplified. Later that evening, Elena returned from work, kicked off her sandals with a tired sigh, and flopped onto the armchair with a grunt. "Rough day at the clinic," she mumbled, finally looking up at me. I met her eyes, the caldereta steaming gently on the small dining table. I answered without hesitation, my voice firm. They can't pretend anymore, not with all of Cebu watching. And it was true. For years I'd been the quiet one, the helper, the girl who kept her head down while her parents took the credit, while Rafa got the spotlight. But now people were reading, people were remembering. And for once, my story wasn't being told about me. It was being told by me. They had tried to silence me. Now they couldn't stop hearing my name. Saturday faded into Sunday like breath disappearing on glass. The neighborhood was still under a blanket of quiet, that heavy, humid stillness that often settled over Cebu after a storm. I had just ended a video call with Melanie, our legal aid contact at the NGO, going over some pro bono cases when I heard it. 3 firm knocks on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Elena was still at her sister's house for the weekend. I pulled my sweater tighter around me, crossed the room, and opened the door. A man in a crisp brown jacket stood on the porch. He didn't smile. "Kian Reyes?" he asked, his voice flat and formal. "It's Tan," I corrected, a reflex. My mind raced. He didn't flinch. "Kian Tan?" I nodded. "You've been served." He handed me a thick white envelope, nodded once more, then turned and walked down the damp concrete steps like this was just another task on his Sunday route. I stood there for a moment, fingers stiff around the edge of the envelope before finally closing the door behind me. At the kitchen table, I peeled it open with slow, deliberate fingers. Inside was a civil complaint for emotional elder abuse, defamation, and abandonment, filed by Mang Tonyo Tan, my own father. I sat down. My hands stayed steady. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I stood up, walked to the cabinet above, Elena's small desk, and pulled out a file folder labeled in black Sharpie. They forgot I was the one who paid. Inside it was everything. Utility bills with my name as the primary account holder, paid consistently for years. Credit freeze confirmations, detailed screenshots of the fraudulent loan attempt under my name, mortgage statements for their house, every single payment drawn directly from my personal savings account, stretching back years. Printouts of the church ledger from the assistant treasurer, clearly showing the misuse of donation funds. And then I whispered to the empty kitchen, like I was speaking to the past. "You're not the only one who knows how to file papers." 3 days later, I arrived at the small courthouse on Osmeña Boulevard, just before 10 a.m. Legal aid had set up a mandatory pre-mediation meeting. No cameras, no formal courtroom, just 2 parties, a neutral mediator, and the truth on paper. Mang Tonyo was already seated when I walked in. He wore his old Sunday barong, the one that smelled faintly of mothballs and faded authority. Aling. Nana sat beside him, draped in a gray shawl that looked too large for her slight frame, her eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. They didn't look at me as I sat across the table. The mediator, a woman in her 50s with weary but kind eyes and a calm voice, began introductions. Mang Tonyo cut in before she finished, his voice trembling with manufactured indignation. "She left us, after everything we gave her, and now she's slandering our name on the internet, in the church. People have turned on us." Aling Nana sniffed sharply beside him, her hand trembling as she dabbed beneath her eyes with a tissue. "She turned people against us," Mang Tonyo continued, his voice rising. "And she's let the whole town believe we abused her. We sacrificed so much for that girl." I didn't speak. I just reached into my well-organized folder and pulled out 3 distinct pieces of paper. One by one, I slid them across the polished table. First, the mortgage receipts. my name, my bank account, every single month for almost 5 years. Next, the certified copy of the fraud alert filed under my name, dated just days after I left the house. Finally, the email from the church treasurer outlining the donation misappropriation. I didn't look at Mang Tonyo or Aling Nena. I looked directly at the mediator. She read the document slowly, quietly, her expression unchanging. When she finished, she folded her hands and said, her voice clear and precise, "Sir, these documents indicate potential criminal liability if pursued. Fraud, extortion, and possibly other charges." The room stilled. Aling Nena covered her mouth and began to sob, loud, shaking sobs that echoed in the small, professional space. Mang Tonyo's face went tight, a mask of shock and fury. He stood abruptly, muttered something incoherent under his breath about unjust accusations, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The mediator didn't flinch. She waited until the silence returned, unbroken save for Aling Nana's quiet whimpers. Then she turned to me and said, her gaze steady, "You didn't just protect yourself, Kian. You exposed a system of silence and exploitation." I didn't say anything back. I simply gathered my papers, sliding them back into the folder. As I walked out of the room, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not victorious, not in a celebratory sense. This wasn't a parade, but grounded, solid. For the first time in my life, the facts spoke louder than their stories. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about record-keeping. And this time, I had kept every receipt. 3 weeks passed like the slow retreat of the monsoon rains in early March. Slow, quiet, leaving traces of itself in all the corners no one swept. I didn't hear from Mang Tonyo or Aling Nena again, not directly, but silence has its own profound tone. The civil suit they filed? It simply dropped. No settlement, no formal ruling, just gone. Word was the mediator's stark warning had rattled them deeper than any court judgment ever could. The church, too, moved quietly. Aling Nena was removed from anything related to donations or financial oversight. No grand announcement, no public apology, just her name quietly off the roster and a new set of hands diligently counting the Sunday envelopes. One humid afternoon, I found myself walking down a familiar lane in our old neighborhood, not because I meant to. I was visiting Elena's relatives nearby and took the long way home, a subconscious pull guiding my steps. That old house, my childhood house, the grand Spanish-colonial facade, looked smaller now, strangely diminished. The porch light was off, even in the encroaching dusk. Newspapers were piled haphazardly at the base of the steps, turning brittle from the sun, and the meticulously manicured bushes hadn't been trimmed in months, growing wild and untamed. I didn't stop. I just walked. Right past, my stride steady. I didn't need to peek through the windows. I had seen enough. The silence emanating from it was far more telling than any public display. A few days later, I signed the lease to a one-bedroom apartment just outside the bustling city center, in a quieter, more suburban area. It was nothing fancy, but it had warmth. Real warmth. The kind that didn't vanish when voices rose or arguments flared. The kind that settled into the very walls. The first morning in my new space, I sat on the floor, sipping coffee from a chipped mug I'd found at a local thrift store. A small, perfectly imperfect treasure. The morning sun hit the far wall, making the worn paint glow like stained glass. I had picked a deep, earthy green for that wall, somewhere between the lush forests of Mindanao and the quiet forgiveness I was slowly finding within myself. While unpacking my final box, a forgotten relic from an old coat pocket slipped out. It clinked softly as it landed on the wooden floor. A crooked, glitter-covered Christmas ornament, shaped like a heart, but lopsided. My name, Kian, was spelled in awkward, childlike letters, the glitter flaking off. I remembered making it in second grade, my tiny fingers struggling with the glue and glitter. Aling Nana had called it too messy and unsightly and tucked it behind the Christmas tree that year, where no one would see it. I hadn't thought of it in decades. I held it gently in my palm. It didn't sting. It didn't spark tears. It just was. A memory. A moment. A marker. I set it on the shelf above my small desk, not as a reminder of their rejection, but as proof that I had been there, that I had always mattered, even if they never said so. That evening, I sat on the tiny balcony with Elena. We wrapped ourselves in a shared blanket, our breath fogging in the cool night air. She had brought over takeout, my favorite pans at Canton, and 2 cans of lemon soda. We didn't talk for a while, just watched the quiet road stretch out beneath us, the distant city lights a soft glow on the horizon. Then I said it, not for her, but for me. I thought losing them would destroy me. Elena didn't flinch. She sipped from her can, leaned her head back against the wall, and said, her voice steady and clear, "You didn't lose them, Kian. You lost who they pretended to be." I nodded. No tears came, no aching void, just a quiet, profound sense of peace. I closed my eyes and let the night in, letting the cool breeze wash over me. For the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It held me. And I held myself. Later that week, I opened a blank document on my laptop. I titled it, "To the Ones Who Are Always Called the Problem." Maybe one day I'd share more than just bills and receipts. Maybe I'd write all of it. The childhood moments, the quiet sacrifices, the eventual reckoning. But for now, I wanted to say something to you. Yes, you. If you're still reading, if you're still here, know this. Sometimes the loudest betrayals happen in silence, in skipped names, in twisted stories. Sometimes the deepest wounds are dressed up as duty, or tradition, or family. But healing? Healing starts the moment you choose yourself. Not in anger, not in vengeance, just in truth. The moment you stop apologizing for not shrinking. The moment you say, "I'm done paying to be tolerated." I still hear their voices sometimes, especially on holidays or when a particular old song plays on the radio. But now mine is louder. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.